Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're jumping into something that, well, it really captures the imagination, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. A topic that just keeps coming up.
The paranormal, those things like maybe fleeting shadows you think you saw, or weird lights way up in the sky.
Exactly. The kind of stuff that makes you stop and wonder.
Yeah, it fuels so many stories, sparks endless curiosity, and it really pushes against our basic understanding of what's real. So our goal today is to try and unpack this a bit. We want to cut through some of the noise, look at the core ideas from the sources we've gathered, and give you a solid but hopefully engaging overview of the paranormal world without it getting, too overwhelming.
Right. We'll touch on definitions, some famous examples, how people even try to study this stuff.
From just stories to actual lab experiments,
Yeah.
right? And then look at the skeptical side, too, the science, the psychology behind belief.
Exactly. It's a big topic.
Okay, let's dive in. Where do we even start?
Well, I think the best place is probably just defining our terms. What do we actually mean when we say paranormal?
Good point. Lay it out for us.
Okay, so the word itself, paranormal, it's actually been used in English since around 1920, maybe a bit earlier. And it breaks down fairly simply. Para means something like above, beyond, or contrary to.
Okay.
And normal, well, in this context, refers to what science can currently explain, established scientific understanding.
So paranormal phenomena are things described in, say, pop culture, folklore, anywhere but science.
Exactly, non-scientific areas. And these phenomena are described as being, well, beyond the scope of what normal science gets.
That's a really key point there. How does that differ from, say, supernatural or maybe preternatural? People seem to mix those up.
Yeah, that's a super common confusion. Supernatural usually implies something completely outside the laws of nature, like fundamentally unknowable by science.
Oh,
Preternatural is more like weird, unexplained, but maybe still natural. We just don't get it yet.
I see.
But paranormal specifically sets itself up against current scientific explanation. That's the crucial bit. In fact, the psychologist Terence Hines, in his book Pseudoscience and the Paranormal back in 2003,
Yeah.
he actually calls the paranormal a subset of pseudoscience.
Why pseudoscience?
Because, he argues, its explanations lean on really vague ideas, things like psychic forces or human energy fields,
Yeah.
terms that sound maybe a bit sciencey.
But aren't grounded in established science.
Precisely. They're well outside the bounds, as he puts it. It often mimics scientific language without playing by scientific rules.
Okay, that definition helps clarify things a lot. So with that framework, what kinds of things actually fit under this paranormal label? Let's start with maybe the biggest one, the one everyone thinks of first. Ghost hunting.
Oh, absolutely. Ghost hunting is probably the quintessential paranormal subject. And when we talk about it, we mean essentially people investigating locations that are reportedly haunted.
Right, looking for proof, trying
Yeah.
to capture something.
Exactly. The goal is collecting evidence, photos, audio, readings of paranormal activity. Now, traditionally, ghost lore says a ghost is the manifestation of a person's spirit or soul after death.
Though I've heard theories about animal ghosts, too.
That does come up, yes. It broadens the idea. But what's really fascinating is how ancient this belief is. It ties back to animism.
Remind me.
The very old belief that everything plants, rocks, rivers, animals has a spirit or soul. George Fraser wrote about it in The Golden Bough.
Okay.
And you can even see visual representations way, way back, like in the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead around 1550 BCE.
Wow, what do they show?
They depict souls looking exactly like the person did in life, down to their clothes. It just shows this incredibly long human history of trying to visualize and understand something beyond death, beyond the visible.
That's fascinating. Okay, moving from ghosts, maybe looking upwards. Ufology, another huge area.
Huge. And here we need to draw a really careful line.
What's that?
The possibility of extraterrestrial life existing somewhere out there. That, by itself, isn't paranormal.
Right, scientists are looking for signs of life on Mars, analyzing meteorites. SETI is scanning the stars. That's all science.
Exactly, using the scientific method. The paranormal aspect comes in with the specific beliefs around unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, now often called UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena.
So the sightings, the alleged encounters, the theories about them being alien spacecraft visiting Earth?
Precisely. That cluster of beliefs is what falls under paranormal ufology. And interestingly, early on, the believers kind of split.
How so?
You had the sort of more conservative ufologists trying to analyze reports, almost like detective work, looking for patterns suggesting ET visitation.
Okay.
But then you also had groups who mixed UFO ideas with existing quasi-religious or occult stuff, drawing on theosophy, spiritualism, New Age beliefs.
So it wasn't just one monolithic belief system.
Not at all. It shows how people interpret the unknown through different lenses.
So why do these UFO theories, the paranormal kind, have such a hard time gaining traction in the scientific community? What are the main roadblocks?
Well, our sources point to a few key things. First, the abilities often described for UFOs, instant acceleration, impossible turns, invisibility.
Things that defy physics as we know it.
Right. They're hard to square with our current understanding of the universe. Second, there's the lack of repeatability. Sightings are usually one-offs, hard to study systematically.
Can't really order up a UFO sighting for the lab.
Not easily, no. And third, unfortunately, the field has been plagued by hoaxes over the years. That naturally makes scientists wary.
Understandable. Okay, one more major category. Cryptozoology.
Ah, yes. The search for hidden animals.
Which is generally classed as a pseudoscience, right? A subculture even.
That's how it's usually described, yes.
Yeah.
Its goal is basically to prove that creatures from folklore are real.
Like Bigfoot, or the Loch Ness Monster, or Mokele-mbembe in Africa.
Exactly. Those are the kinds of entities they're after. Cryptozoologists call them cryptids.
It definitely taps into that desire for mystery, the idea that maybe there are still big secrets hidden in the world.
Absolutely. That sense of wonder, the possibility of discovery, it's very appealing.
Okay, so we have ghosts, UFOs, cryptids. These are the subjects. But how do people actually try to investigate them, especially given that core challenge we mentioned?
The challenge being, if you could prove it with the scientific method, it wouldn't be paranormal anymore.
Exactly. So what approaches do people take?
Well, probably the oldest and most common approach is simply collecting stories. The anecdotal approach.
Anecdotes, like personal accounts.
Yes. And the most famous collector, sort of the godfather of this, was Charles Fort. Lived 1874 to 1932. He was apparently obsessed with collecting weird stuff reported in newspapers and scientific journals. Things scientists at the time couldn't explain or just ignored.
What kind of things did he collect?
Oh, everything. He supposedly gathered like 40,000 notes, reports of teleportation. He actually helped coin that term.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Poltergeist activity, weird things falling from the sky like frogs or fish, crop circles, objects found where they shouldn't be, out-of-place artifacts or oparts.
Wow.
He even championed the idea of alien abduction way back then. People call him the father of modern paranormalism. And his legacy lives on in things like 14 Times Magazine.
That's quite a collection. But what's the issue with relying only on anecdotes if you want scientific understanding?
The core issue is reproducibility. Science needs things you can test again and again under controlled conditions. An anecdote is a one-time story.
It depends entirely on whether you believe the person telling it.
Exactly. It hinges on the storyteller's credibility and their perception, which isn't objective, verifiable data in a scientific sense. Great for stories, not so much for proof.
Okay, so if anecdotes are tricky, what about trying to bring this stuff into the lab? That's parapsychology, right?
That's the idea behind parapsychology, yes.
Yeah.
Trying to use experimental methods. The most famous example is probably J.B. Rhine at Duke University.
What did he do?
He ran experiments starting in the 1930s, trying to find evidence for extrasensory perception, ESP, things like telepathy or clairvoyance.
How did he test for that?
Using things like card guessing. Zener cards, with the symbols circle, cross, waves, square, star.
I know those.
And also dice rolling experiments, trying to see if people could mentally influence the outcome.
Sounds more scientific. Did it work?
Well, this is where it gets complicated. Rhine reported statistically significant results suggesting ESP was real. His work got very popular.
Odds.
But later analysis revealed major problems. Serious methodological flaws, procedural errors.
Like what kind of errors?
Oh, things like the guards being slightly translucent so you could potentially see the symbol through the back, or cards being poorly printed or cut, giving subtle cues. Even the possibility of testers giving unconscious signals through their expressions or voice. And sometimes just statistical errors or not accounting for sensory leakage properly.
So the controls weren't as tight as they needed to be.
That was the major criticism, yes. And despite the Parapsychological Association forming and even getting affiliated with the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, for a while, these criticisms were damaging. They eventually led to the formation of skeptical groups, like the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, CSI.
And what's the status now?
Today, most mainstream scientists view parapsychology as a pseudoscience. They argue that after more than a century, there's still no compelling, repeatable evidence for ESP or psychokinesis.
So research continues, but it's mostly privately funded.
Largely, yes. It doesn't get much support from mainstream scientific funding bodies.
Okay, so anecdotes are problematic. Lab experiments faced serious methodological issues. What other ways do people investigate? I've seen those ghost hunting shows on TV.
Ah, yes. That would fall into the participant-observer approach.
What does that mean?
It's more of a qualitative method. Researchers, or investigators in this case, immerse themselves in the environment they're studying, like those independent ghost hunting groups you mentioned.
They go into the haunted houses, use the gear.
Exactly. They become participants in the activity itself. Reality TV shows like Ghost Hunters definitely made this approach much more visible.
It looks engaging, certainly. But does it work scientifically? What are the pitfalls?
Well, the big risk is subjectivity. It's very hard to remain objective when you're personally involved in experiencing things.
Right, you might want to find something. Confirmation bias.
Precisely. There's also the observer effect. Just being there might change things or how people interpret things. Data collection is often not very systematic.
So lots of personal experiences, maybe some readings from EMF meters or thermometers.
But it often relies heavily on subjective feelings or data points that are hard to interpret definitively. It makes drawing scientifically sound conclusions really challenging.
Which brings us neatly to the other side of the coin, the scientific skeptical investigation.
Right. The approach that says, okay, people report these things. Let's apply rigorous critical thinking and the scientific method to see if there are normal, natural explanations.
And a key tool here is Occam's razor, isn't it?
Absolutely. The principle that all else being equal, the simplest explanation is usually the best one. Don't jump to ghosts if faulty wiring or infrasound could explain the weird feelings.
And groups like CSI, which you mentioned, champion this approach.
Yes, CSI and publications like Skeptical Inquirer are major proponents. They emphasize looking for those rational explanations first. They point out that while some people report seeing, a full-bodied apparition—
That is rare.
very rare— a much larger number report more ambiguous things. Shadows, cold spots, weird noises, a feeling of presence.
And skeptics suggest these might have natural causes.
Exactly. Psychologist Richard Wiseman, for example, suggests that many of these feelings might be generated internally by our own brains rather than externally by some entity.
Interesting, like Michael Persinger's work with magnetic fields, trying to induce strange sensations.
Yeah, Persinger's God helmet experiments were famous. He claimed weak magnetic fields could create feelings of presence or other unusual experiences.
Did that hold up?
Later replications suggested it was more likely due to psychological suggestion rather than the magnetic fields themselves. But it shows scientists are trying to find physical explanations.
And what about psychology itself? Can our own minds explain why we perceive paranormal things?
Oh, definitely. That's the field of anomalistic psychology. It looks for normal psychological explanations for seemingly paranormal experiences.
What kind of explanations?
Well, psychologist David Marks proposed several. Things like magical thinking, vivid mental imagery being mistaken for reality, subjective validation where you find meaning in vague statements.
Like horoscopes.
Kinda, yeah. Also, coincidences. We're good at noticing weird coincidences, but bad at judging how likely they actually are. Plus, hidden causes we just don't know about, and unfortunately, sometimes outright fraud.
Cognitive biases play a role too, right? Like confirmation bias we mentioned.
Hugely. We tend to look for and remember information that confirms what we already believe. Illusory correlation, too, seen connections between things that aren't actually related. These biases can really maintain paranormal beliefs.
Are there links to personality traits?
Research suggests there are. Paranormal belief has been linked to things like higher fantasy proneness, tendency towards dissociation, absorption, getting really lost in experiences, and sometimes neuroticism, or less rational thinking styles.
What about education or intelligence?
Some studies do show correlations typically, higher levels of education, particularly science education, and sometimes higher IQ scores are associated with lower levels of paranormal belief. Though it's complex, not a simple cause and effect.
Why do people believe then, if the evidence is weak in their psychological explanations?
Well, researcher Dean Radin offered a few hypotheses. One is the ignorance hypothesis. People just lack the scientific knowledge to evaluate claims critically.
Okay.
Another is the deprivation hypothesis. Belief serves a purpose, like coping with stress, uncertainty, or a lack of control in life. It provides answers, even if they're not scientific.
That makes sense, like a psychological comfort blanket.
It can function that way, yes. Studies have linked paranormal belief, particularly things like belief in fate or psychic abilities, to being a coping mechanism, especially for people who've experienced trauma or feel powerless.
Hmm. What was the third hypothesis?
The deficiency hypothesis, which suggests it might stem from things like lower intelligence or poorer critical thinking skills. But the coping mechanism idea seems quite compelling in many cases.
You see this in specific areas too, like alien abduction reports.
Yes, research on people reporting alien contact often finds higher levels of traits like absorption, dissociation, fantasy proneness, and even a greater tendency towards hallucinations compared to control groups.
And there are demographic differences too.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
Surveys often find women score higher on overall paranormal belief scales, while men tend to score higher specifically on belief in UFOs and ETs. There can also be ethnic variations in belief in specific phenomena, like spirits or witchcraft. It's a complex picture.
It really makes you think about how much our own psychology shapes how we see the world.
Absolutely. And neuroscience is trying to look even deeper at the brain processes involved.
What are they finding?
Some studies suggest differences in brain electrical activity, like EEG patterns between believers and skeptics, or differences in how the two hemispheres of the brain function.
Anything more specific?
One really interesting line of research links paranormal belief to dopamine levels in the brain.
Dopamine, the reward chemical.
Yeah, but it's also involved in pattern recognition and finding significance in things. Higher dopamine levels might make people more prone to finding patterns and meaning, even in random noise.
So seeing faces in clouds or connecting unrelated events, potentially linked to brain chemistry.
It's a hypothesis being explored, yeah. That our neurochemistry might predispose some people towards making these kinds of connections that underpin paranormal beliefs.
Fascinating stuff. Now, there's also criticism about how the media handles the paranormal.
Oh, definitely. Many critics argue that media films, TV shows, books often promote paranormal claims uncritically, without enough skeptical balance.
Why is that seen as a problem?
Well, skeptic Paul Kurtz called the public fascination a kind of quasi-religious phenomenon, a transcendental temptation. He saw it as almost like a modern form of magical thinking.
And Terrence Hines, who we mentioned earlier.
He went further, calling the uncritical acceptance potentially a form of consumer fraud, and even damaging to society because it could undermine rational thinking.
Strong words. But despite all this skepticism and lack of proof, belief is incredibly widespread, isn't it?
Hugely widespread. And it's important to remember, polls measure belief, not whether the phenomena are real, but they tell us a lot about people's mindset.
How widespread are we talking?
Some estimates suggest maybe 3 to 4 billion people worldwide hold some belief in parapsychological powers. That's massive.
Wow. Any specific studies?
Yeah, a notable one from Monash University in Australia back in 2006 found some striking numbers. Around 70% of people reported having some kind of life-changing unexplained event, mostly positive ones.
70%? That's huge.
And about the same number, 70%, claimed to have seen, heard, or felt the presence of someone or an animal who wasn't there. 80% reported having a premonition. Nearly 50% believe they recalled a past life.
Those aren't fringe numbers at all. What about in the U.S.?
U.S. polls show similar trends over the years. Belief in psychic or spiritual healing is consistently high, around 55–57%. Haunted houses, around 37–42%. Ghosts, 32–40%.
Still significant chunks of the population.
Definitely. Belief in ESP fluctuates, but often sits between 30% and 50%. Telepathy, maybe 25–36%.
What about aliens and ancient mysteries?
Belief that extraterrestrials have visited Earth gets decent numbers, maybe 18–33% believing they visited in the past, and 26–48% believing they're visiting now or have visited in modern times. And belief in lost civilizations like Atlantis is surprisingly high, around 55% in some polls.
It really shows, as physicist Robert L. Park said, that many people believe because they want it to be so.
That desire for wonder, for meaning beyond the mundane, seems deeply ingrained.
Which leads to the big question. If so many people believe, and investigators are trying, why hasn't anything been definitively proven to the satisfaction of science? We hear about challenges, right? $1,000,000 prizes.
Exactly. And this isn't new. Back in 1922, Scientific American magazine offered $2,500, a lot of money then, for proof of spirit photography or psychic powers under test conditions.
And who was on the committee?
None other than Harry Houdini, the famous magician and escape artist who was also a dedicated debunker of fraudulent mediums.
Did anyone claim it?
People tried. One famous medium, George Valentine, was tested. But he failed when it was discovered his chair was rigged to send a signal if he got up during the seance in the dark.
Ouch. Called out.
Yep. And fast forward to today, the prize money is much bigger. There are several organizations offering large sums, combined value over $2.4 million, for anyone who could demonstrate paranormal ability under scientifically controlled conditions.
The most famous was probably James Randi's $1 million challenge.
That's the one. The James Randi Educational Foundation offered $1 million for years. Thousands applied. Many were tested.
And the result?
Nobody ever passed the preliminary test to even get to the final challenge. The prize was never claimed.
Never claimed. Wow.
And other groups, like the Independent Investigations Group, IIG, based in Hollywood, they offer $100,000. Since they started in 2000, they say no claimant has ever passed their initial scientifically controlled tests either.
So, despite widespread belief and dedicated searching, the proof just isn't there when subjected to rigorous testing.
That seems to be the consistent outcome of these challenges, yes.
Okay, well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground today. We've gone from defining the paranormal, exploring classic subjects like ghosts and UFOs, looking at how people try to investigate, from anecdotes to experiments.
And then delving into the scientific skepticism, the psychological factors behind belief, the neuroscience hints.
Right, and the landscape of belief shown by polls contrasting with those unclaimed prize challenges. We've really seen that tension between the human desire for the extraordinary and the scientific demand for solid evidence.
It's a fascinating intersection, isn't it?
It really is. And maybe that's the final thought to leave everyone with today. This enduring fascination with the paranormal, what does it ultimately tell us? Not just about ghosts or aliens, but about us. Our curiosity, our fears, our deep need for meaning, how we grapple with the unknown in a world that, well, it often resists easy answers.
Definitely something to think about. Our own reflection in the mystery.
Something to chew on until next time.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at Anders Celsius, and yeah, that name means temperature to pretty much everyone, but is that the whole story?
It really isn't. You know, the Celsius scale is everywhere, obviously, but when you dig into the records, the biographical stuff, the scientific papers from the time, well, there's just so much more there. Our mission today is to get past the thermometer.
Right, uncover the full picture of this 18th century Swedish scientist.
Exactly, because he was involved in a lot more than just temperature scales.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Uppsala, Sweden, 1701. And he wasn't just anyone born there, was he? His family background is pretty remarkable.
Oh, absolutely striking. I mean, think about it. His father, Nils Celsius, was an astronomy professor. His uncle, Olaf Celsius, a famous botanist. And even his grandfather was a mathematician and an astronomer.
Oh, yes.
Well, science was the family business, you could say.
Wow, yeah. You can almost picture the dinner table conversations. Must have been intense.
Definitely. So that environment, it clearly pointed him down a certain path. And apparently he had a real knack for it early on, especially mathematics.
So he follows in the family footsteps, studies at Uppsala University, and by 1730, he's actually a professor of astronomy there himself.
That's right. So long before the temperature scale discussion, his focus was really up towards the stars. In fact, that same year, 1730, he published a pretty significant work, let me get the Latin right, Nova Methodus Distantium Solis, a terra determinandi.
Which means?
A new method for determining the distance from the Earth to the sun. So right away, tackling big astronomical questions.
Okay, so astronomy is his main thing early on. But he didn't just stick to planets and distances, did he? He got interested in other sky phenomena, like the aurora borealis.
Yes, the northern lights. And his work there with his assistant Olaf Hjorter was really quite pioneering for the time. He wasn't just describing them. He was looking for causes, for connections. And here's a key thing. He was one of the very first to suggest a link between the auroras and changes in the Earth's magnetic field.
Really? That early? Connecting this visible light show to an invisible force like magnetism? That feels like quite a leap.
It was a significant insight. And he backed it up with observations. He actually watched compass needles deviating, moving erratically, and noticed that the bigger movements happened when the auroras were stronger.
That's fantastic observation. So methodical. Did he publish this work?
He did. He compiled this huge collection, 316 observations of auroras made between 1716 and 1732. He got that published in Nuremberg in 1733. It shows just how dedicated he was to studying them systematically.
Now, around this time, he also started traveling quite a bit, not just staying in Uppsala.
Right, between 1732 and 1735, he went on this grand tour, essentially visiting the big European observatories, Germany, Italy, France.
Just soaking up the knowledge. Or is there more to it?
Oh, it was more than just learning. It was about connecting with the wider scientific community, seeing the latest instruments, exchanging ideas. And while he was in Paris, he got involved in a really important debate. He started advocating for measuring a meridian arc way up north in Lapland.
Okay. Measuring a piece of the Earth's circumference. Why Lapland specifically?
Well, it was all tied into this huge question about the actual shape of the Earth. Newton's theories predicted it should be slightly flattened at the poles, like an orange maybe. Others still held to the idea of a perfect sphere. Measuring a degree of latitude near the pole and comparing it to one near the equator was the way to settle it.
Ah, the classic flattened Earth versus sphere debate. And Celsius didn't just talk about it, he actually went.
He did. He joined the French Academy of Sciences expedition to Lapland in 1736. It was led by Pierre-Louis Maupertuis. Must have been quite an adventure.
I can only imagine. Trekking around Lapland in the 1730s to measure the Earth. So what did they find?
They meticulously measured the length of a degree of latitude up there. And when they compared their results to similar measurements done in Peru, much closer to the equator, the results were clear. Newton was right. The Earth is an ellipsoid, flattened at the poles.
Wow. So Celsius was right there, hands-on, helping to prove the fundamental shape of our planet. That's huge.
Absolutely. And he wrote about it, too, in 1738, Observations on Determining the Shape of the Earth.
And I bet being part of such a high-profile, successful expedition didn't hurt his reputation back home.
Not at all. It gave him a huge boost. Suddenly, he had a lot more clout, with the government, with his peers. And that was really instrumental in getting the support and, crucially, the funding he needed for his next big project. A proper observatory in Uppsala.
Which he managed to establish in 1741.
Yes, the Uppsala Astronomical Observatory. And thanks to his travels, he knew exactly what kind of modern instruments it needed, and he managed to acquire them.
So he wasn't just founding it, he was equipping it properly, making it a serious center for research.
Definitely. He used it to observe eclipses, stars, other celestial objects. He even came up with his own system for measuring star brightness photometry. He cataloged the magnitudes for about 300 stars using his method. Very systematic work.
Okay, so astronomer, aurora researcher, Earth shape measurer, observatory founder. We've covered a lot, and we still haven't gotten to the thing everyone knows his name for.
It's quite something, isn't it? All that, and then comes the temperature scale in 1742. He presented it to the Royal Society of Sciences in Uppsala. But here's the twist that often surprises people. His original scale. It was upside down compared to what we use.
Upside down. How so?
On his scale, 0 degrees was the boiling point of water, and 100 degrees was the freezing point.
Get out, really boiling was 0. That seems counterintuitive now. Why set it up that way? Any idea?
The sources don't give a definitive why for his choice, but it's just fascinating that it was inverted, and it wasn't even him who flipped it.
So who did?
That seems to have been Carl Linnaeus, yes, the famous botanist. Apparently, sometime after Celsius died in 1744, maybe around 1745, Linnaeus suggested reversing the scale, 0 for freezing, 100 for boiling, the way we have it now. And only later was it officially named Celsius in his honor, using this reversed version.
That's a critical detail. So the scale we use is Celsius's concept, but modified by Linnaeus. It shows how science isn't always just one person's invention. It evolves.
Precisely. It's often collaborative, iterative. But the core idea, the 100-degree interval between freezing and boiling, that was Celsius's key contribution to thermometry.
Okay, so main claim to fame sorted, albeit with a twist. Did he dabble in anything else scientifically?
Yes, a couple of other things worth mentioning. He did geographical measurements for the Swedish general map, basically, helping to map Sweden more accurately. And he was also one of the first people to notice that Scandinavia seems to be slowly rising out of the sea. We now know it's post-glacial rebound.
Ah, the land bouncing back after the Ice Age.
Right. His explanation for why it was happening, something about water evaporating, was off, but spotting the phenomenon itself, that gradual uplift, was quite perceptive for the time.
And throughout all this, he seems to have been pretty central to the scientific community in Sweden itself.
Very much so. He became secretary of the Royal Society of Sciences in Uppsala way back in 1725 and held that post right up until he died. Plus, he was a big supporter of founding the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences in Stockholm in 1739. He was one of the founding members.
Really involved in building the institutions of science, too.
He even suggested the name for the academy. It shows he wasn't just focused on his own lab work. He cared about the whole scientific infrastructure in Sweden.
So, summing up Anders Celsius, it's way more than temperature. It's astronomy, calculating the sun's distance. It's groundbreaking aurora research, linking it to magnetism. It's literally helping measure the Earth, founding a major observatory, being a key figure in Sweden's scientific societies, and, yes, also proposing that centigrade temperature scale, even if it got flipped later on.
That really covers it. You see how interconnected it all was for him? His travels fed into the observatory work. The Earth measurement gave him clout. He had a huge impact.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We use the Celsius scale every single day, checking the weather, cooking. It's so fundamental.
Yeah.
And yet it comes out of this incredibly rich background of astronomy, physics, exploration, and scientific collaboration.
Which leads to a final thought, perhaps, for you listening. Think about other simple tools or units we use constantly: kilograms, meters, seconds, even things like maps. How many of them have similarly complex, surprising histories, born from centuries of curiosity, debate, and discovery by people like Celsius? It's easy to forget the depth behind the everyday. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey into pharmacology, the science of how drugs and medications interact with living organisms.
That's right.
We've gathered quite a bit of source material, and our aim really is to unpack the key concepts, look at its history, and show just how wide-ranging its impact actually is. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. So pharmacology, at its heart, is the study of drugs. Our sources break it down pretty clearly. It covers everything from where a substance comes from, what it's made of, to how the body handles it. That's pharmacokinetics. And then what the substance does to the body, pharmacodynamics.
Right.
And it also looks at therapeutic use, so how it can heal, but also toxicology, the potential harm. Is basically understanding that whole interaction between chemicals and living things. And if those chemicals have medicinal properties, well, then we call them pharmaceuticals.
Okay, so it's a really big field then. Let's maybe start with the name itself, pharmacology. It sounds quite technical, but you mentioned its roots are, well, a bit more primal.
They are, yeah. It comes from the Greek word pharmakon. And what's interesting about pharmakon is that it meant both drug and poison.
Wow, okay.
That's telling.
It is, and that's combined with logia, which just means study of. But the connection gets even deeper because pharmakon is linked to pharmakos.
Pharmakos.
Yeah, in ancient Greece, that was a ritual sacrifice, a sort of human scapegoat, essentially. It really points to this very old understanding that certain substances had immense power that could be double-edged, life-altering stuff.
From ritual scapegoat to, well, modern medicine. That's quite the journey hidden in a word. And today, pharmakon isn't just about prescription drugs, is it?
Not at all. The modern use of pharmakon is much broader. It includes substances, our own bodies make endogenous substances, plus other things that are biologically active but maybe aren't used as typical drugs.
Like what, for example?
Well, think about agonists or antagonists molecules that either switch receptors on or block them. Or enzyme inhibitors, like the monoamine oxidase inhibitors used for depression. They all fall under this wider umbrella now. Got it. Now, here's something I think confuses a lot of people, myself included sometimes. Pharmacology versus pharmacy. They sound almost the same, but they're definitely different jobs, right?
That's a really common point of confusion, and it's important to clarify. Pharmacology is basically biomedical science. It's about research, discovery, asking how chemicals work in living systems.
The fundamental science part.
Exactly. The how and why. Pharmacy, on the other hand, is a health services profession. Pharmacists take all that knowledge from pharmacology and apply it in clinical settings, dealing directly with patients dispensing drugs, advising on use, making sure it's safe and effective.
So research versus application, discovery versus delivery.
You could put it that way, yeah. Pharmacology builds the knowledge base. Pharmacy uses it for patient care.
Makes sense. Okay, let's rewind then. Where did this all start? It's kind of amazing that people were using some pretty potent natural stuff ages ago.
It really is. The sources mention opium from poppies being used way before 1100 BCE. That's a long time ago.
Definitely.
And morphine, which is the main active compound in opium, wasn't actually isolated until 1804. But what's fascinating now is we know how it works. It's an opioid agonist. It fits into specific receptors in our bodies, opioid receptors, and triggers pain relief. People were using this complex chemical tool without knowing anything about the molecular machinery involved.
Just based on observation, presumably? This poppy stuff makes the pain go away.
Pretty much. So
Yeah.
for centuries, maybe millennia, it was all about observation and experience. We start seeing a more systematic approach emerge around the Middle Ages.
Okay, how so?
Well, that's when you feels like pharmacognosy, the study of medicinal plants, really taking shape, and hugely influential texts like Avicenna's Canon of Medicine appear.
Hmm.
Early pharmacology was very focused on herbalism, plant extracts, knowledge collected in pharmacopoeias.
These big books of plant remedies.
Exactly. People use crude drugs from nature forever, basically, but purifying the active ingredients, that came much, much later.
And what about all the traditional medicine systems, like in China or Tibet? How do they fit into this story?
They're absolutely part of it.
Mm.
Traditional Chinese medicine, Mongolian, Tibetan, Korean systems, they all represent incredibly old forms of essentially pharmacological practice. Lots of empirical knowledge built up over centuries.
Though modern science might view some of it differently now.
Well, yes, some practices are now considered pseudoscience. But these traditions often hold really valuable observations about how natural substances affect the body. And you also had things like entheogens, psychoactive substances used in spiritual contexts. Another way people explored how chemicals impact biology and consciousness.
So a mix of observation, tradition, ritual. When did it start to feel more like, well, science as we know it?
The shift really picks up in the 17th and 18th centuries. You had figures like Nicholas Culpeper in England translating texts, making knowledge about plants and their uses more accessible.
Right.
And William Withering in the 18th century did some groundbreaking work, really laying down the foundations for clinical pharmacology with his studies, like on digitalis from Foxglove. But pharmacology as its own distinct scientific discipline, that really solidified in the mid-19th century. There was a big resurgence in biomedical science then. Before that, explanations for drug actions were often, well, pretty vague.
And that's when universities started creating actual departments for it.
Precisely. Rudolf Buchheim set up the very first one in 1847 at the University of Tartu. The goal was specifically to understand how drugs and poisons actually worked. England followed later, 1905, at University College London.
So the institutional shift. And what about the tools? Were there key inventions that helped researchers dig deeper?
Oh, definitely. The organ bath was huge. It let researchers test drugs on isolated tissues outside the body in a controlled way, see how muscles contracted or relaxed, that kind of thing.
Direct measurement.
Exactly.
Correct.
And then a bit later in 1945, the ligand binding assay. That allowed scientists to actually measure how strongly a drug binds to its target, like a receptor. Quantifying the interaction, those tools were absolutely crucial for moving beyond just observation.
And that leads us to modern pharmacology, which sounds incredibly complex now.
It really is. Modern pharmacology uses everything: genetics, molecular biology, biochemistry, advanced imaging, computational modeling, you name it. The aim is to understand things at the molecular level, find new targets, design better therapies, diagnostics, preventative measures, and even personalized medicine for individuals.
It's come such a long way. Okay, so let's break down this huge field. What are some of the major divisions within pharmacology? You mentioned it's diverse.
It is, yeah. One way to slice it is by the body system involved. So you have neuropharmacology that's all about the brain and nerves.
Central and peripheral nervous systems.
Right. Then immunopharmacology focuses on the immune system. Cardiovascular pharmacology deals with the heart and blood vessels, renal with the kidneys, endocrine with hormones. You get the idea. Specialized areas.
And psychopharmacology is a big one, right? Drugs affecting the mind.
Absolutely. Psychopharmacology looks at drugs that influence psyche, mind, behavior. Think antidepressants, antipsychotics. It draws heavily on neuropharmacology, but also behavioral science, trying to understand mental disorders and how drugs can help treat them. And there's neuropsychopharmacology, too, really focusing on that intersection of brain function and mental state.
Then you have these newer emosomics fields. Pharmacometabolomics. That sounds intense.
It sounds complicated, but the concept is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Metabolomics studies all the small molecules, metabolites in our system. Pharmacometabolomics uses that to see how drugs change that metabolic fingerprint.
So like tracking the chemical echoes of a drug.
That's a good way to put it. You measure metabolites in blood or urine after someone takes a drug, and it helps predict how they'll process it or monitor its effects on their metabolism. Gives a very detailed picture.
And pharmacomicrobiomics, that brings in our gut bacteria.
Exactly. It studies how the trillions of microbes in our gut, our microbiome, influence how we handle drugs. It turns out they can have a massive impact on drug absorption, metabolism, even toxicity. It's a huge, rapidly growing area. Who knew gut bugs were so important for meds?
It's wild. And then the genetic side, pharmacogenomics and pharmacogenetics. What's the difference there?
They're closely related. Uh, Pharmacogenomics is sort of the big picture, using genome-wide approaches to see how all our genes influence drug response. Pharmacogenetics zooms in more, looking at variations in specific individual genes and how that leads to different reactions to drugs.
Okay, broad versus specific genes.
Right. And then you've also got pharmacoepigenetics. That looks at changes on the DNA, not in the DNA sequence itself, epigenetic marks that affect how genes are read and how that influences drug response too.
So it's not just the genes, but how they're expressed.
Precisely. It adds another layer of complexity and another step towards truly personalized medicine.
Incredible detail. Okay, let's shift focus a bit. How does all this science translate into actual medical practice? Clinical pharmacology comes in here.
Yes, clinical pharmacology is really the bridge. It applies all those pharmacological methods and principles directly to studying drugs in humans. Things like figuring out the right dose. That's a whole field called posology.
And you mentioned toxicology earlier, the study of harm. How do pharmacology and toxicology relate?
They're two sides of the same coin, really. Both study chemical actions.
Yeah.
But pharmacology is primarily looking for the therapeutic effects, the benefits. Toxicology is focused on the adverse effects, the harm, and assessing risk.
Finding the good versus identifying the bad.
Essentially, yes. Though often the same substance can do both depending on the dose. That's a key concept.
And all this knowledge underpins pharmacotherapy, using drugs to treat illness.
Exactly. You need that pharmacological understanding to choose the right drug, the right dose, for the right patient, for the right amount of time. It's fundamental to medicine and pharmacy.
Now, drug discovery. That sounds like the really exciting but also maybe daunting part, creating new medicines from scratch.
It is exciting and definitely daunting. It's the whole process. It starts with drug design, the creative part, finding molecules that might work, often designing them to fit a specific biological target, like a receptor or enzyme.
Like designing a specific key for a lock.
Kind of, yeah. Then, once you have a promising lead compound, you move into drug development. That's the long, rigorous, expensive part, testing, refining, making sure it's safe and effective enough to actually bring to market.
And economics plays a big role here, right? Pharmacoeconomics?
Absolutely. Is the drug worth the cost? That's what pharmacoeconomics looks at, the value proposition for healthcare systems. You also have pharmaceutical engineering dealing with the practicalities, how to make the drug consistently, formulate it properly. And safety pharmacology is constantly looking for potential unexpected side effects throughout the process.
So it's a massive regulated undertaking. What does that cycle generally look like?
It's incredibly controlled. You've got agencies like the FDA in the US, the EMA in Europe, setting very strict rules.
Makes sense for safety.
Totally. It starts with preclinical work, lots of lab tests, computer modeling, animal studies. They look at how the drug is metabolized, whether it's toxic.
Yeah.
They study the structure-activity relationship, or SAR.
Meaning how changing the shape changes the effect.
Exactly. Tweaking the molecule to make it better, safer. They might make hundreds of variations analogs. Then, if it looks promising, it moves into human clinical trials.
And that takes years, right?
Oh, yeah. Multiple phases, often 6 years or even more. Testing for safety first in small groups, then effectiveness in larger groups. It's a huge investment. The sources say maybe only 1 in 5,000 potential drugs actually makes it all the way.
Wow, 1 in 5,000. And costing over $1 billion.
Easily. That explains why companies need patents and why they do market research. They need to recoup those costs somehow. There's even something called the inverse benefit law, suggesting sometimes the most heavily marketed drugs aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest clinical benefit.
Interesting point.
And of course, you always have to account for the placebo effect when testing. Is the drug really working, or is it just the power of suggestion? It's a complex mix of science, regulation, and business.
Definitely complex. Okay, broadening out again. What about looking at drugs in whole populations? Pharmacoepidemiology.
Right. That field studies how drug effects vary across different groups of people in the real world. It combines clinical pharmacology with epidemiology, the study of disease patterns in populations.
And pharmacoenvironmentology, that's the drug pollution angle.
Yep. What happens to all these drugs and personal care products after we use them? They end up in wastewater, in the environment. This field studies those ecological impacts. It connects human health back to environmental health.
A connection we probably don't think about enough. And ethnopharmacology adds the cultural layer.
It does. It looks at traditional medicine uses in different cultures, the historical context, the anthropological side of how people have used medicinal substances.
And finally, looking ahead, you mentioned photopharmacology. Light-activated drugs. That sounds like sci-fi.
It sounds futuristic, but it's a real emerging field. The idea is to create drugs you can switch on or off using specific wavelengths of light.
Why would you want to do that?
Precision. Imagine activating a drug only exactly where it's needed, right in a tumor. For instance, minimizing side effects elsewhere. Or switching it off quickly if needed. Plus, maybe less environmental contamination if inactive drug gets out. It's very cutting edge.
Very cool. Okay, let's dig into the core theories now. Understanding why drugs work at that fundamental molecular level.
Right. It's not enough to know that a drug works. Pharmacology wants to know how. And that requires understanding the biological systems involved, cell biology, biochemistry. As our knowledge there grows, so does our understanding of drug action.
So you can analyze receptors, pathways.
Exactly. And then design chemicals to interact with them very specifically. Which brings us back to those two key concepts, pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics.
What the body does to the drug and what the drug does to the body.
Precisely. Kinetics is the journey absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. Dynamics is the effect therapeutic or toxic.
Let's look closer at pharmacodynamics then. It's often about ligands binding to receptors.
Very often, yes. A ligand is just a molecule that binds, could be a drug, could be something our body makes naturally, like a neurotransmitter. It binds to a receptor, usually a protein.
And that binding causes something to happen or not happen.
Right. An agonist binds and activates the receptor, causing a response. Think of it like turning a key and opening the door. A partial agonist turns the key, but maybe only opens the door a partway weaker response. An antagonist binds, but does nothing itself. It just blocks the keyhole so the agonist can't get in.
Okay. And then we talk about efficacy and potency. How are they different?
Efficacy is about how much response a drug can produce, its maximum effect. On a graph, it's the height of the effect curve. Potency is about how much drug you need to get a certain level of response, often 50% of the maximum effect. That's the EC50.
So a potent drug works at lower doses.
Exactly. Lower EC50 means higher potency. A drug could be very potent but have low efficacy, or vice versa. They're distinct measures. Affinity, how tightly the drug binds, influences both, but especially efficacy.
And the therapeutic index that tells us about safety margin.
Yes, it's crucial. It's a ratio between the dose that causes the desired effect and the dose that causes toxicity. A wide therapeutic index means there's a big gap between the helpful dose and the harmful dose, generally safer.
Like paracetamol, maybe?
Relatively wide, yes. Whereas something like warfarin, a blood thinner, has a narrow therapeutic index. The dose has to be managed very carefully.
Yeah.
Small changes can push it from effective to dangerous.
Got it. Okay, now pharmacokinetics, the LADME process. Can you break that down?
Sure. LADME, liberation, absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. That's just the drug getting released from its form. The pill dissolving, the patch releasing. Then absorption is the drug getting into the bloodstream.
How it gets in.
Right. Distribution is how it spreads around the body to different tissues. Metabolism is the body chemically changing the drug, often in the liver. This can make it inactive or sometimes active or even toxic.
And finally, excretion.
Getting rid of it, usually via kidneys and urine or sometimes in bile and out through feces. Understanding all these ADME steps is critical for dosing. How often do you need to take it? How much?
And things like whether a drug dissolves in fat or water really matter here.
Hugely. A drug's physicochemical properties, its size, charge, lipophilicity, fat-loving nature, determine how easily it gets absorbed, where it goes in the body, how it's broken down and removed. Bioavailability, how much of the dose actually reaches the blood unchanged, is a key outcome of these properties.
Makes sense. You need some fat solubility to cross cell membranes.
Generally, yes. And then drugs tend to concentrate more in organs with lots of blood flow, like the brain, liver, kidneys.
So all this incredibly detailed science directly informs drug policy and safety regulations.
Absolutely, it has to. Regulatory bodies like the FDA or the UK's MHRA rely completely on this pharmacological data. The FDA, for example, requires proof of effectiveness, usually meaning better than placebo in at least 2 good trials in safety.
Which involves all that animal testing and human trials we talked about?
Extensive testing. It takes years. They need to be confident the benefits outweigh the risks for the intended use.
And the approved doses are set within that therapeutic window we discussed.
That's the goal, yes. Finding the dose range that works for most people in the target population without causing unacceptable side effects. Laws like the Prescription Drug Marketing Act in the U.S. add more layers of control over safety and effectiveness.
Okay. And lastly, the field itself. It's supported by professional societies, education.
Oh, absolutely. There are international bodies like IUPR, the International Union of Basic and Clinical Pharmacology, that help guide the field, and various classification systems to organize drugs, like ATC codes.
And studying it requires a broad background.
Definitely. Physiology, pathology, chemistry are core. Increasingly, biophysics, computational science too. It's very interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
Pharmacists need this knowledge daily. Pharmacologists are usually the ones doing the research in universities, industry, government labs.
Lots of career paths.
Yeah. Academia, pharma companies, biotech, science writing, regulatory affairs, patent law. It has wide applications. And it's a fundamental part of training for doctors and pharmacists.
Well, this has certainly been a comprehensive deep dive into pharmacology. It's a really clear just how massive and dynamic this field is, from ancient potions to personalized medicine.
It really is. The journey from just observing that, say, willow bark helps pain to understanding aspirin's molecular action on cyclooxygenase enzymes, it's incredible progress. And it touches so many areas: biology, chemistry, medicine, environment, culture.
And it really underscores that constant tightrope walk, doesn't it? Seeking the benefit while managing the risk.
Always. That pharmacon concept, drug and poison, is still relevant.
So, looking ahead, as we understand biology even better, maybe we'll see even more targeted, safer drugs. It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The potential for precision is huge.
But it also raises questions, perhaps. If we can tailor drugs so individually, what ethical considerations pop up?
A lot to mull over. Thank you for taking us through this fascinating world.
My pleasure. It's a field that never stands still.